Today is April 12th, 2024. The movie Civil War is in theaters. Now, if you don't know anything about this movie, it's about if the United States had another civil war like right now. These days, the political climate has the word civil war popping up frequently. With this movie, I'm sure we're going to hear it more and more, especially from the media and some politicians who survive on clicks and views. With all that in mind, I thought today we would list 10 reasons why the US will never really have an all-out civil war. Or at least in our lifetime. Just so you know, the title of this video is basically my position on the subject. It's never going to happen, not in our lifetime. Maybe 200 years from now? Who knows? But as it stands right now, there are too many things in play that would stop the United States from going to an all-out civil war. I will explain why as we go along the video. This is just my opinion. I would love to hear your opinion and would like to read your thoughts in the comments section below. It's a discussion, not a speech. Now, if you look at the history of civil wars, all the way back to the Roman Empire, we are going through some things right now that historically have happened right before a civil war. Political turmoil, rich are getting richer, the poor getting poorer, as the old saying goes. Other countries are actively trying to get Americans to turn against each other, and our own politicians keep bringing it up. They like to call it a national divorce, and I think that's because if they call for a civil war and it actually happens, they get lumped in that whole 14th Amendment thing. So today we look at the 10 reasons why the US will never really have an all-out civil war. Let's take a look. Number 10, loss of life. Loss of life is a big deterrent from any kind of war. People usually getting you into the war view the loss of life, whether it's military or civilian, as a price of doing business type attitude. And that's one of the biggest reasons that we'll never see a civil war. We're not to the point, I don't think, where that is the price of doing business. We have our differences and there are some problems in the United States, but I don't think we're at that point to where, human life doesn't really matter as much anymore to the general population. Widespread fighting would result in deaths among both military personnel and civilians, including collateral damage from bombings, shootings, and other acts of war. There's no getting around it. Now, there's no way of knowing what the actual toll would be. But if you just look historically at our original Civil War, which I get it, things were a lot different then. We didn't have bombers, but this is the only way we could kind of get somewhat of an idea. The American Civil War from 1861 to 1865 killed at least 620,000 soldiers, or about 2% of the American population in 1861. This is the highest number of fatalities in any American war, more than World War I and World War II combined. The reason for that, both sides of the war were considered Americans. Now, a similar rate today, about 2% of the population of the United States, would mean about 6 million fatalities. Now, let's say the Civil War lines were split just like they were in 1861, North versus South. And something similar could happen to this day. I mean, if it went red and blue states, Republican versus Democrat states, something similar could happen, and it would look like this. And it's what happened in the first Civil War. The Southern nation, or the red states, would struggle for survival against a wealthier and more populous enemy. Its death toll reflected in the disproportionate strains on its population. The wealthiest states in the United States right now are, for the most part, the blue states. Texas, Florida, and North Carolina are the only states that have a really powerful economy. That is comparable to some of the blue states like California, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Colorado, Washington, Maryland, and Delaware. Now, how things shake out and how the country could possibly separate could go a million different ways. I'm just using those as an example. In the movie Civil War, it's broken down into 4 different factions, where California and Texas are aligned. If something like this were to happen and the red and blue states went at each other, the red states do have some advantages. We'll get to that later. So the fear of loss of life is what would stop this from happening. We'll get into that after a brief message from today's sponsor, Aura. As someone who spends a lot of time online, it's important that I know that my information isn't where it shouldn't be on the internet. If you do a quick Google search of your name, you'll find out who's got your information. And that is uncomfortable. I don't like seeing that. There are these people out there called data brokers, and they sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who wants to target you. This is how they make their living, so you know they're putting some serious effort into it. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Clearing this information will help with spam and lowering the risk that someone gets your information and hacks into your online life. Hackers can get into your bank account, social media accounts, and get a hold of other sensitive information that you don't want them to have. I get other features like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, ID theft insurance, and more without downloading several different apps. It's very easy to set up, and best of all, you can get all this at a very affordable price. Sometimes it's what you'd pay for a single service. Most of us have really hectic lives, and it's good to have someone like Aura on your side. You may already have one or two of these tools, but not having Aura is like locking your front door and leaving your back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping me safe so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours, so you could go to aura.com/Briggs and get a 2-week free trial from Aura. There's also a link in the description area below. All right, back to the video. Number 9, displacement. Millions of people would be on the move to get out of the way of this civil war. People would be heading to Mexico. People would be heading to Canada. People would be getting on slow boats to China if they could. Not everyone in the United States or in any country is up for a war. Doesn't matter their political beliefs, doesn't matter the other side's political beliefs. 90% of the population would want nothing to do with anything like this. If you look at the political makeup, let's say we're going back to that scenario where the country's split by political makeup, each side's people aren't all involved with the politics. I've seen different numbers, but it's normally around 28% of the population is Republican, 28 to 30. It's always somewhere around there. Democrats, it's usually 27 to 29%, somewhere in there. The rest of the people are independent or they don't care. So if you're under the illusion that everyone in a red state or a blue state would be all on board with this, you're crazy. Most of the people would be heading for the hills and trying to get out of the country, trying to get out of the way. This would create a major problem. Look what happened to Europe a few years back when all those people were leaving Syria and all that, and they're landing in the different countries in Europe. They were avoiding a war. Neighboring countries might tighten their borders to control the flow of refugees, potentially leading to standoffs or conflicts at the border crossing, and maybe even drawing one of our neighboring countries into the fight. More on that later. Number 8, cyber warfare. This would be the first problem, and this is a big worry, especially for a lot of tech companies. I mean, cyber warfare would be probably the new front line of any war we're going to have, especially if it's civil war in the United States. We have become an information society. We depend on information, whether it's personal information like where your kids, where's your family, what time movie starts, to serious information, let's say disasters, missing children, those Amber Alerts. So when you have a population that is that dependent on something like that, that is one of the first things you want to attack. Anyone in the military knows that. So cyber warfare would be part of the lead up to any armed conflict we have, and it would continue throughout the war. And again, remember, not everyone's on board with the cause. Some people just worry about their own little world. They don't care who votes for who. They don't care about any of that stuff. What they do care about is you taking their lifeline to the internet away. And it wouldn't just be the personal data. You would see attacks on critical infrastructure, including power grids, banking systems, and government databases. Every state knows this, every governor knows this, everyone in the government knows this, and they are afraid of it. And they know this is a big problem if we were to go to a civil war or any war with anyone. I mean, we're fending off cyber attacks every single day in this country. I'm sure hundreds of them. Number 7, the decline in U.S. global influence. The U.S. might start to lose its position as a global leader, impacting international trade, military alliances, and global policies on issues like climate change, human rights, trade, you name it. In a lot of categories, in a lot of situations, the United States is the top dog. Now imagine if you split that top dog in half. Or, like in the movie, split it into 4. Suddenly we're Scandinavia, as far as influence and power. Number 6, the impact on financial markets. global markets would react negatively to the instability. That's not just ours, across the globe. This would lead to crashes in stock markets and crises in banking systems and the confidence in America's financial stability. The impact of the United States Civil War would have on other financial systems is such a big issue, a lot of countries would actively be trying to help us stop the Civil War, while some countries think there's a financial payday for them if we do fall apart. But most countries would not be into it, and they would do everything they could to stop us from having a civil war. We touch on this one a little bit more later on in this video. Germany would be all, we got to stop these guys from going to war, but are we the ones that should give them a call? Have France do it. Number 5, infrastructure and environmental damage. Any warfare includes damaging infrastructure. They blow up bridges, they blow up dams, they kill roads, they destroy airports. Anything they can do to make it rougher for a society to function, they do during an all-out war. If you watch any war movie, they always talk about blowing up bridges. That's not just in the movies. That's what they do. Top of all that, the environmental destruction due to warfare and the neglect of environmental protections would be devastating to our ecosystem here in the United States. Crops would be firebombed. Dams, like I said, would be blown up, causing widespread flooding. If you look at it from a statistical point of view, take the more wooded states we have, Pennsylvania, Maine, Oregon, Mississippi. If someone started firebombing our forests, we wouldn't be able to put any soldiers on the field. They'd be back here trying to put out forest fires, and that would cause more environmental damage. Number 4, potential for wider conflict. Now this one's real. Any war, any civil war, there's always been allies that jump in for the other side. Right now we got the whole thing going on Russia-Ukraine. I'm surprised nobody has completely jumped in. I mean, everyone's giving supplies to Ukraine and, other countries are trying to help Russia and that's a hands-off approach sort of right now. The Korean War wasn't just North Koreans versus South Koreans. Vietnam wasn't just Americans versus the Vietnamese. The list of countries involved in World War II, it's probably longer than the list of industrial countries that weren't. Other countries would definitely take sides. I'm sure most of them would have the intention of trying to help us put the Civil War down, end it, whatever. Some would get involved to make sure we are destroyed. So the fear of our enemy taking advantage of us during something like this and maybe attacking the United States is why we'll never have a civil war. Our politicians know this, our military knows this, and I'm sure most of the people understand that too. Number 3, increase in crime. You might think we got bad crime here in the United States now, but imagine what it's like when there is no law enforcement, it is a war zone, things happen. People steal from each other, people kill each other for their food, and things like that. Now, I know there's a whole bunch of you, let's see them try that with me. I got guns everywhere. Well, so does a lot of other people. I always like when people make statements like that. They always say it like there's no possibility of them ever getting shot. But law enforcement agencies during a civil war would either become non-existent or at least overstretched and dysfunctional. People would have to fend for themselves, and that's not a good thing. I've watched a few of those videos with those prepper guys that are all getting ready for the end of the world or end of society or whatever. They always say things about how the only currency that'll exist in a situation like that is bullets and food. I'd throw medicine in there too, and that brings us to number 2 on this list. Number 2, healthcare and food shortages. Now this is where, if it was broken down by red versus blue states, the red states would really excel. California, Oregon, and Washington have some solid farming. I don't think it's enough to sustain a society. The breadbasket of the United States is the middle of the country, and most of them happen to be red states. So if it did draw battle lines there, the blue states would be at a pretty good disadvantage. The red states would probably see a serious shortage of fresh seafood, I imagine. A civil war, though, would overwhelm the healthcare system due to conflict-related injuries and displacement-related public health crises. On top of all that, you got all these people that are already sick, they need medication and everything else like that. It would be chaos. Being an asthmatic in a war zone is not a good thing. Then you look at, like I said, the food and resources. Shortages in food, water, and essential resources will lead to a serious humanitarian crisis. You know things get bad when Mexico has to do food drops on the United States, Could you imagine how fast Mexico would build a wall if this really happened? Honestly, think this is one of the biggest ones. Healthcare and food shortages scares a lot of people. The McDonald's in your city might be open, but they're probably out of bread at least a few times a week, and they might have meat only a couple times a week. One other part of this that a lot of people probably don't think about is a lot of the research and development we have in healthcare would probably come to a screeching halt for a few years, and that few years would set a lot of life-saving drugs back a decade or so. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. It deals with a lot of things like this video. We go over things that happened in the past on that date, whatever the date is. It's geared for high school students on down. I kind of make it for schools. All the income from that we donate to Donors Choose, which is a website that gives money to classrooms all across the country. You could choose what classrooms you want. It's really neat. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, the economic decline. Now, it's no secrets giant corporations and billionaires pretty much run this country. Or at least they give the politicians so much money, the politicians do their bidding. That's not a theory, that's not a conspiracy, that's a fact. And if these billionaires and millionaires and corporations see that their profits are going to go downhill because of a stupid civil war, they're going to yank funding from any politician encouraging this type of action faster than a cheetah on Adderall that's 2 cappuccinos into his day. That is the biggest thing that will stop any civil war: money. Some of the biggest companies we have will never survive a civil war. Home Depot will be gone. Lowe's, those are the first places that would be looted and destroyed across the country. Gas stations would be gone. Refineries would be destroyed. Satellites could be blown out of the air, killing AT&T and just about any other cell service. Cable television would be reduced to news channels only, if even that, because people aren't going to be advertising on television or on the internet if there's a freaking war going on. The severe disruption in the economy, including job losses, stock market crashes like we talked about earlier, and these business closures would stop a civil war dead in its tracks. The politicians that are bringing this up all the time, you'd never see their face again on television if this looked like it was seriously going to happen, or on a podcast, because those cable news channels make money through advertising and they know a civil war would end that. The only people that will be turning a profit, I'm sure, have something to do with the military-industrial complex. Every other industry would be firmly against a civil war, and funny thing about politicians, they like their money, and if the money ain't coming in, they do things to correct that. Alright, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. I would love to hear about it. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.